Welcome back to the Goheen Cycles YouTube channel and episode number 5 of the VTX web build. In this episode, there's a couple things we're going to accomplish. We're going to remove the rear fender again. Once the rear fender's removed, I'm going to flip it over and show you guys the weld that's on the inside of the fender that I need to get rid of. Once that weld has been removed, we're going to slide it in the planishing hammer and start to get rid of the rib that's on the top of the fender. I'm not going to be able to take it out completely. Most of that's going to have to come out with body work, but I want to hammer down what I can. Once that's all done, we're actually going to move back to the front of the bike. I had the spacers made to make this fender fit the VTX forks. Those spacers are now here. I have bolts where I can temporarily put everything on. I need to verify that there's not going to need to be no other supports on the inside of the fender to make sure it's not going to flex. Once that's all finished, the fender's mounted on the front of the bike. I'm actually going to start working on the rear fender. After talking to Jimmy Holstein, I believe there's probably going to be, there's a case for me to use 16 gauge steel instead of 18 gauge steel. 18 gauge is what you guys saw me cut in the last episode. Since I'm not using that, we're going to switch to 16 gauge. I'll still use that 18 gauge probably on the sides of the fender or something like that. But for the top, since the fender's going to be so long, I want to keep it the 16 rather than going to the 18. So from there, we're going to go ahead and cut the top section. We're going to slide it into the English wheel, and we're going to go ahead and get started rolling on it. We're not going to get real far with that in this episode. That part of this is going to take a good amount of time. I know I talked about when I first started this web series that we were going to try to keep it to 12 videos. I don't want to cheat you guys out of content, and I don't want you guys to think that it's something that just happens overnight. So I'm going to do what I can to try to keep to that promise, but I have a feeling we're going to be closer to 15. That's just the way things are going to roll out with the amount of things I need to do to this bike. Well, so with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I want to kind of show you guys what I have to get rid of. To remove this rib that you can kind of sort of see in the reflection from this light. If you look right here, there's a rib right in the top of the fender. That's got to go. The problem is, that's where Honda welded the fender together. That's a weld that goes all the way through there where they welded both of these halves together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a grinder with a flat disc. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to remove this bead down through here. Get it as flat as I can so that when I put it in the planishing hammer and attempt to get rid of it from this side, that right there that you see will come out a little easier. And you can see on the back here, I've kind of gotten rid of it on the very bottom. So what I'm going to do is try to attempt to get rid of the rest of that all the way up through this fender. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, now that you can see, the rib is almost completely removed. It's just slightly there. I don't really want to take much more off of that, but you can see that it's pretty much almost gone. That'll give me plenty enough, it's shaved enough off that I'll be able to reshape that pretty well. Alright, so before we actually slide the fender into the planishing hammer, there's a couple safety things I want to go over. Number one, you need to use some sort of gloves. I use a goat skin glove. The glove, it's going to keep you from getting your hands cut up. Second, you have to have hearing protection. It's extremely loud and your ears will be ringing for hours if you don't. So those are two imperative things that you'll see me use throughout this process. Goat skin gloves, even an English wheel, just to keep it from cutting my hands up. And when I'm using the planishing hammer, I always have hearing protection in. So let's get started. All right, the rear fender's been pulled out of the planishing hammer. I went ahead and mounted that on the bike off of camera. I mean, you guys have seen me mount and unmount this fender 2 or 3 times now, so didn't feel like it was something you guys needed to see again. So at this point, I went ahead and we're going to move to the front fender. I'm going to show you how I mounted it, show you the spacers and stuff like that, and actually how I got the holes in the fender where I needed them. Make sure you're going to want to have some sort of centering punch, and I used paint. There's a couple different things you can use, but let's go ahead and get started on that now. I had some custom spacers made. Those are here. Those will actually sit between the fender and the forks. So what we need to do is, because obviously there are no holes there, we need to mark that. Before we actually mark it, I wanted to verify that the fender was actually sitting where I wanted it. So I put some air in the system on the bike. It's actually sitting about 2 or so inches lower than stock, but is not completely aired out. I wanted this line on the fender to sit level with the ground. So when you're riding down the road, this is perpendicular to the pavement. When you dump it out, obviously this is going to tilt back just a little bit, but that's going to be inherent with dumping all the air out. The rear fender is going to do something very similar to that as well. So what I'm using as a spacer inside of this fender, I have a big piece of bubble wrap, which you can kind of see here. And what that's doing is that's making sure that the fender is actually sitting around the tire where it needs to. And I've already straightened everything up, so this is exactly where I want it. So as you can see here, I just have a little angle finder with a magnetic base on it. It's clipped right here on the bottom of the fender, and if you can see right there, that's actually reading 0. That's exactly where I want the fender to sit. I'm not going to move the camera around and everything, but I've actually checked both sides to make sure the fender's not sitting off one way or another. Now let's go ahead and mark where the holes need to be on the fender so I can get those popped. So to mark these holes, I'm going to use a centering punch. I actually have a whole set of them here, which I'll show you. This is a whole set of them. It's just a cheap set from Harbor Freight. I wouldn't actually suggest to use them on any hard metals. I've actually ruined the small little tip that you see here. I'll try to get it in frame so you can see it. There's a small tip on the end of that. And I've actually ruined, I think 2 or 3 of them now from trying to use them on thicker metal. But what's going to end up happening is I'm going to put a small dab of white paint on the end of this. And I've already verified this is the one that will fit this hole exactly. And what will happen is, to transfer the middle of that hole to the fender, I'll basically, with wet paint on there, move this out and just touch the fender and then bring it back. It'll leave a little white mark. I'll go over here on the other side and do the same thing. So for some reason it's not picking it up on camera, but there is a small mark right there that I'm going to actually use as my drill hole mark. So now at this point I'm going to go to the other side, I'm going to mark those holes. Once those holes are marked, we're going to pull the fender off, put some holes in it. So as you can see here, fender is now mounted on the bike. So at this point, that's where it's going to sit. I don't think I'm going to need to put a reinforcement on the inside of this. This thing's actually pretty solid. So now we're going to start working on the rear fender. Alright, so I got the rear fender mounted back on the bike. I'm going to use this piece of TIG rod to kind of show you what my idea of this fender is going to be. I think what I'm going to do is it's going to come down and make a similar shape to this. Curve down, curve out at the bottom. So first I need to make basically this piece here, and then this will be straight to here or somewhere in there, and then we'll have a small kick out at the bottom with a reverse curve. So that's what we're going to get started on. I can already tell, so we're starting to get a slight amount of curvature, and you can see that here, this way and this way. You can see it there. So in just that little bit of time, I was able to pull it up a little bit. So at this point, I think the best thing going to be to do, I may actually end up here soon having to actually take the shrinker and stretcher along both sides of this and shrink this down. So what it'll do is it'll pull this curvature in a little bit, but I want to do everything I can to avoid doing that. I also try to roll in both directions on this for a couple reasons. One, I like to roll it in both directions so that you don't get a lot of the wheel marks in one direction, and then that's a lot of body filler. This will push those out, but also, since we're doing, it's kind of a compound curve. You're curving it this way, you're also curving it this way. Since you're curving it both ways and this wheel is actually curved, you can get the curvature going both ways fairly quickly that way. So we're getting somewhere. It's slight. This is not a fast process at all by any means. But something else I wanted to explain really fast. I have multiple of these lower dies in lots and lots of different shapes. I mean, we can go extremely rounded here, but you don't necessarily want to jump right into the deep end when you're doing this. From what I've found, you want it to, to get the similar curvature, you want to get to where there's a less of a radius die here. Use that die until pretty much it matches the radius that's on here, and then step to another one that's a little bit more severe if you don't get the curve you want out of it. You don't want to just jump right into having one that's the biggest radius, because it's going to move metal in funky ways, and it seems like, at least to me, it seems like I spent a lot of time trying to fix things when I just tried to jump into the deep end and go to a really, really severe radius die. So let's continue on. Alright, so as you guys can see here, I've got some curvature in this piece of metal here. It's not flat like it was in either direction. This is just the start of this, and this is actually going to be numerous hours that I don't necessarily feel like I want to film and or you're going to want to watch because it's kind of boring. So you can see where it's not a flat piece of metal anymore, but I have a long way to go. Lots of curve this way, lots of curve this way. So once I get to the point where I feel like I'm getting close, as far as round curve, I'm not horrible looking at it from the side. It really follows the same. Now I need to get a lot of curve going this way so that this curve will match. And I think if I was able to do that and keep a similar profile to what I have with my slope going this way, I'd be pretty happy. So, alright, thanks again for stopping by. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out our Instagram feed. I'm going to be throwing some pictures and stuff like that of this bike on there. Hit that like button. That really helps me out. And I know that YouTube's algorithms really base off of how they suggest videos to people, off of how many likes are on a video. So that really helps me get this content out there to more people, especially guys in the metric world. This stuff's all out there for Harleys all over the place, but not too many guys are doing custom work like this on VTXs. So make sure you hit that like button. Give me a comment down at the bottom. Let me know what you think of this build. And if you have any questions about what I'm doing, make sure you put it down there as well. I'll do the best I can to get that stuff answered for you. So again, next week, first thing we're going to start, I'm going to try to have everything finished on that rear fender. You're going to see probably a small montage of how I got where I am with that. We'll get it tacked on. We're going to start working on the next piece. So thanks again for stopping by the channel, and I'll see you guys next week.